The sky was clear that morning, one of those days that to anyone's eyes would seem perfect for a family outing. The birdsong blended with the soft sound of the wind rustling through the leaves of the trees. But behind that serene beauty, something dark was hiding, something that would forever change the history of that family. Leonardo Bastos, a 35-year-old man and heir to one of the largest fortunes in the region, walked with firm, cold steps along an isolated trail atop a cliff. His expensive Italian leather shoes contrasted with the dirt path, while his immaculate clothes seemed completely out of place in such a rustic setting. In front of him, in a wheelchair, was Isabella, his 7-year-old daughter, a little girl with big brown eyes, the color of aged wood, eyes that carried a mixture of innocence and pain. Ever since the accident that left her paralyzed, Isabella's life had never been the same. As he pushed the wheelchair, Isabella watched the butterflies, crossing their path, always trying to find beauty where there was barely any left. She looked at the horizon and in a timid voice, almost a whisper filled with fear, asked, "Daddy, why are we here? This isn't the same path as usual." Leonardo didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, as if trying to ignore the very existence of his daughter. His hands gripped the wheelchair handles tightly. Each step felt heavier, not physically, but with the weight of what he was about to do. A few meters behind, there was a silent observer, Thor, the family's Doberman. A large, muscular dog with a sharp, loyal gaze unlike anything any human could offer. Thor had always shown an unusual affection for Isabella, protecting her as if she were more than his owner, as if she were his life's mission. The dog sensed something was wrong. His ears perked up, his paws shifted restlessly, and he sniffed the wind, staring intently toward the trail. The instinct for danger that every animal carries had been triggered. Isabella noticed they were approaching a part of the trail she had never seen before. Her small, fragile hands tightened around the armrests of the wheelchair. The wind grew stronger, as if nature itself was trying to warn her. "Daddy, we're getting really close to the edge." Her voice faltered, and she swallowed hard. Leonardo took a deep breath, as if trying to summon courage, or maybe to suffocate whatever trace of humanity still remained within him. His eyes, once empty, now reflected a mix of tension and coldness. He stopped the wheelchair, looked down. The abyss was right there, deep, terrifying, perfect, for someone with no soul left. For a few seconds, there was only silence, a silence louder than any sound, until, in a cold voice, devoid of any emotion, Leonardo said, "Sometimes, Isabella, what keeps us from moving forward needs to be left behind." Before she could understand what that meant, he let go of the wheelchair. Gravity did its cruel job. The chair slid, gained speed, and in a matter of seconds disappeared into the abyss. A scream tore through the sky, a small scream. The scream of a life that didn't deserve that fate. Leonardo turned his back without looking, adjusted his shirt cuffs, straightened his suit, took a deep breath, and began walking back. But he didn't realize that Thor had seen everything. And in that moment, something changed inside that dog, something no human could ever comprehend. What happens in the next few minutes is going to leave everyone in shock. The sound of the wind carried Isabella's scream, blending with the roar of the waves crashing violently against the rocks at the bottom of the cliff. It was a sound few humans would ever hear, but it didn't go unnoticed by the one who truly mattered. Up there, at the edge of the trail, Thor the Doberman was on high alert. His eyes were locked on the void, where the wheelchair had vanished. His body was tense, his chest heaving, his paws scraped against the dirt, as if ready to attack an invisible enemy. The dog began running in circles, sniffing, analyzing, trying to understand. Thor wasn't just a guard dog. He was trained, intelligent, and above all, deeply connected to that little girl. He knew. He felt that something was terribly wrong. With a howl that tore through the silence of the trail, Thor took off, sprinting along the edge of the cliff, desperately searching for a way down, a path, anything. He barked, long, powerful barks that echoed through the surrounding forest, startling birds, sending squirrels into hiding, even alerting the winds themselves that something terrible had happened. Miles away, on the other side of the property, at the workers' quarters, Pedro, the old groundskeeper, was wiping sweat from his brow while fixing a fence when he heard that sound. He stopped, lifted his head, squinted. "Thor," he muttered, frowning. That dog never barked like that. He was trained. His barks always had a reason. This wasn't just an alert. This was a cry for help. Back at the cliff, Thor ran back and forth until something caught his attention. Far below, among the rocks, a sound. "Help! Help!" A faint voice, nearly swallowed by the wind. His ears perked up. He stepped closer to the edge, looked down, and through the cracks in the stone he saw her Isabella, trapped. Miraculously, the wheelchair had gotten caught between roots and rocks, preventing her from falling all the way to the bottom. Her small arms were scratched, a tiny cut marked her forehead, and tears mixed with sweat and fear streamed down her face. But she was alive. "Thor! Thor! Help me!" She screamed with all the strength her tiny vocal cords could muster. Hearing that, the dog barked, loud, strong, determined, a sound that was no longer just a bark. It was a vow. "I won't leave you here." Thor started running again, sniffing, searching for a path. At the same time, on the other side of the trail, Pedro had already dropped his tools and was walking quickly, looking in the direction of the sounds. Something in his heart told him this wasn't an ordinary day. Meanwhile, Leonardo was calmly walking back to his mansion, adjusting his shirt cuffs as if nothing had happened. His eyes showed no remorse, no guilt, only coldness. A coldness that bordered on psychopathy. In his mind, his thoughts lined up methodically. "I'll say she ran off or disappeared. No one will ever know. And finally, I'll be free of this burden." But what Leonardo didn't know was that this Doberman wasn't just any dog, and that fate, when it wants to, can use the most unlikely weapons to write a new story. And from that moment on, nothing would go according to his plan. Thor ran with every ounce of strength his muscular body could muster. His eyes scanned every inch of the slope. His paws sank into the dirt, slipped on loose rocks. But he didn't stop. Nothing in the world could make him give up. The Doberman wasn't just a trained dog. He was Isabella's four-legged guardian angel. And at that moment, he knew, maybe better than any human, that time was running out. The wheelchair creaked with every gust of wind. It was barely hanging on, tangled between two thick roots, one of which was already starting to crack. The rocks beneath shifted, sending gravel tumbling into the empty void below. Isabella trembled, not just from the cold, but from sheer terror. Her hands gripped the arms of the wheelchair so tightly that her fingers began to ache. "Thor, help me! Please don't leave me here." Her voice broke between sobs. From above, Thor pushed forward until he found something, a narrow, almost invisible trail zigzagging down the side of the cliff. A path used by wild animals, one no human would dare to face. But he would. Without hesitation, Thor began descending. His front paws controlled the weight, while his back legs braced to keep from sliding. With every loose rock, his body tensed. Climbing down that cliff would challenge even a mountaineer, let alone a dog. But he kept going, for the girl, for the only human who had ever looked at him not as an animal, but as family. Meanwhile, on the other side of the property, Pedro was now running. Something burned inside the old groundskeeper's chest. The sound of Thor's barking grew louder, more desperate. Then, reaching the trail that led to the cliff, he stopped, his eyes widened. Fresh tracks at the cliff's edge, wheelchair tracks, marks on the ground, deep scratches as if the wheelchair had been pushed hard. Pedro followed the marks with his eyes, and then his heart froze. The void, the abyss, and down there, something gleamed between the branches and rocks. It was her, my God, Isabella. The man's scream tore through the morning silence. Thor, now halfway down the cliff, looked up and barked, as if to say, "I'm here! I found her! Now help us!" Pedro clutched his head with both hands and took a deep breath. Panic surged, but he knew panic wouldn't save anyone. He had to act fast. He had to get help. Meanwhile, down on the cliffside, Thor pressed on. Every meter was harder, loose stones, steep drops, broken roots. The dog slipped but clung on with his sharp claws. His body trembled not from fear, but from sheer effort, until finally he made it. He jumped onto a lower rock and from there was able to get face to face with Isabella. Their eyes met, hers full of tears, fear and pain. His filled with determination, love and a silent promise. "I'm here, and you are not going to die alone." Thor stepped forward, placed his front paws on the wheelchair's footrest, and began licking the girl's face, as if to say, "Hold on, I found you. You're not alone anymore." Even in the middle of terror, Isabella managed to smile. A weak, unbroken by sobs. I knew you'd come," she whispered, clinging tightly to the Doberman's fur, but up above, the wind picked up again. Clouds began to gather. The scent in the air carried a warning. A storm was coming. Time was running out. The danger was far from over, and the real rescue hadn't even begun. Pedro ran back to the farm, as if carrying his own heart in his hands. Each step felt heavier than the last. His mind raced, trying to process what his eyes had seen, but the only thing he truly knew was there was no more time. When he reached the stables, he threw the door open so hard it startled the animals. With trembling hands, he grabbed his phone and dialed a number he never thought he'd need to call. "Hello, it's an emergency. I need a rescue, now. It's at the cliff behind Bastos farm. A child is trapped on the rocks." His voice was desperate, but steady. On the other end, the dispatcher barely had time to process the information. The moment she realized the severity, the high-risk rescue protocol was immediately activated. Helicopters were being prepped, search teams, climbers, paramedics. Everything moved like pieces on a chessboard, but against the clock. Meanwhile, down at the bottom of the cliff, Isabella clung tightly to Thor's neck. The dog's front paws were planted firmly next to the wheelchair, as if his body alone could hold the entire structure in place. Every now and then he glanced upward, searching for help, then back at her, licking her face, trying to keep her awake. "Don't fall asleep, little one. Stay with me." His determined gaze seemed to say. The wind began to howl harder. Dark clouds took over the sky like an army of shadows. A thunderclap cracked in the distance. Moments later, the smell of rain filled the air, and then the first drop fell, then another and another. In seconds, the drizzle turned into a storm. With every gust of wind, the wheelchair groaned, rocked, and the root holding it let out a dry crack, like a bone about to snap. "Thor, I'm scared," the girl whispered, her voice nearly lost beneath the thunder. The dog answered the only way he knew. He lay down beside the wheelchair, pressing his body against it, as if his weight alone could keep it from tipping. Then he barked. He barked with all his strength, with every ounce of air his canine lungs could hold. A bark that wasn't just sound. It was a cry for help that pierced through the wind, the storm, and fate itself. Back at the mansion, Leonardo Bastos sat in his office, sipping whiskey, staring out the window, watching the rain fall. His face was was that of a man who felt nothing, no guilt, no regret. The phone rang. He glanced at it. Unknown number. He ignored it, dropped another ice cube in his glass, swirled it, and whispered to himself, finally, peace. But he didn't know that while he toasted his own coldness, a dog and a little girl were fighting against fate, and more. He didn't know that the call he had just ignored wasn't just any call. It was Pedro. It was life knocking on the gates of the hell he had built. In the center of town, sirens began to wail. Patrol cars, ambulances, and a rescue helicopter were being readied for takeoff. News spread fast, like fire on dry grass. And with it, a whisper of shock and outrage. The daughter of the Bastos heir, she's on the cliff. At the farm, the workers started stirring. Some tried to understand, others simply looked at the sky, crossed their arms and shook their heads, as if something that had always been hidden was finally coming to light. And as everyone moved, as the rain pounded the earth among the rocks, the cold and the fear, Isabella held on to Thor with the last strength she had left. She looked at him and whispered, "You didn't leave me. You stayed. Thank you, Thor." But then the root cracked again, a dry, sharp snap. Loud. Fate now hung by a thread. The wind howled as if nature itself were mourning what was about to happen. The root holding Isabella's wheelchair creaked once more, this time with such force it sounded like a final warning. Time's up. Thor, his body pressed against the chair, looked desperately around, as if somewhere in his canine mind there might be a magical solution. But there wasn't. All he had was his loyalty and his own body. The wind shoved, the chair swayed, the back wheels lifted off the ground for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. Isabella screamed, clinging tightly to the dog's neck, as if somehow Thor could defy the laws of gravity and hold her in place. And then, crack! The main root snapped. The chair slid a few inches. The rocks below gave way. Chunks of earth crumbled, tumbling down, carrying with them small stones, leaves, branches, and along with them, it felt like hope itself was breaking. But no, not yet. Not while Thor was there. In a desperate leap, Thor bit down on the side strap of the wheelchair, and with every ounce of strength his body could produce, dug his paws into the wet ground, scraping, fighting, slipping, but holding on. The weight of the chair dragged him. His back legs had nowhere left to brace. He was sliding, but he wouldn't let go. His jaw ached. His bones felt like they were about to snap, but he wouldn't let go. Isabella cried, squeezed her eyes shut, feeling the world sway, feeling herself suspended between heaven and hell, held by nothing but the courage of an animal that had never once in her life seen her as anything less than his family. "Don't let go, Thor. Please don't let go," she begged, her whole body trembling, and then from the top of the cliff a voice shattered through the storm. "Isabella, Thor!" It was Pedro. The old groundskeeper dropped to his knees at the cliff's edge, a rope in hand, eyes frantically searching the rocks until he found them. The dog, hanging on, gripping the wheelchair with his teeth. And the girl, wide-eyed, wrapped around the animal, literally caught between life and death. "Oh my God," Pedro shouted, throwing the rope down. "Hold on, Thor! Hold on, boy! I'm gonna get you out of there! I swear to God I will!" But Thor couldn't release the chair to grab the rope. His body trembled, his front paws slipped in the mud. And in that moment, the impossible seemed inevitable. Then, slicing through the roar of the storm, came a sound. "Tur! Tur! Tur!" The rescue helicopter appeared. Its lights swept across the cliff, searching for what seemed impossible to find. The pilot looked at the crewman and shouted, "We've got them! Drop down, now! There's a girl and a dog!" From the helicopter, a rescuer descended, strapped to a cable, battling the wind, the rain, and the sheer danger. Every meter down fought back against him, but there was no choice. Every second counted. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Leonardo Bastos stood by the window. watching the flashing red and blue lights now surrounding his property. His face, once expressionless, began to lose its color. "No, no, this can't be," he stammered, gripping his trembling glass. No, she can't. She can't be alive." But she was. Because while he had plotted destruction, God had sent a four-legged angel to rewrite the story. On the cliff, the rescue operation intensified. More people joined by the second. Police, firefighters, locals, all stood watching from a distance this spectacle of courage, fear, love, and miracle. And even when everything seemed stretched to its breaking point, the fight was far from over. The helicopter's blades sliced through the air with a deafening roar, mixing with thunder and the howling winds. Powerful searchlights swept across the cliff face, illuminating a scene that no one there would ever forget. Rescue operator. Marco descended, strapped to the cable, his body swinging like a leaf against the force of the wind. His eyes locked onto the sight before him, and for a moment his chest tightened. This can't be real," he murmured. There it was, a wheelchair hanging by roots that were barely holding, swaying dangerously, and next to it, a dog. No, not just a dog, a warrior. Thor, the Doberman, held the chair with his locked jaws. His paws were sunk deep into the mud, slipping. Veins bulged in his neck, his body trembled. He was at the limit, not of his strength, but of his very existence. But not for a second did he let go. Isabella, curled up, clung to his neck. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but now they shone, because she knew love never lets go. "Hang on, sweetheart. Hang on, boy," Marco shouted, adjusting his harness and moving in quickly. He positioned himself at the precise point, locked onto the main cable, and pulled out a secondary support rope. "I need to secure both of you at once," he thought. "No way I'm leaving either of you behind." The first thing he did was kneel and strap an emergency harness around the girl. "You're so strong, sweetheart. Hold on tight, okay? I'm getting you out of here," he said, as he wrapped the safety strap around Isabella's fragile torso. Isabella only nodded. Her hands wouldn't let go of Thor's fur, as if someone might take him from her at any second. "What about him?" she asked, locking eyes with the rescuer. Marco looked at Thor, who, even exhausted, still held the wheelchair between his teeth. Their eyes met, and in that instant he understood. This wasn't just a child and a dog. It was one soul taking care of another. "No one gets left behind," Marco replied, fastening a second harness around the dog's body. "We're getting out of here together, I promise." The radio crackled. "Marco, the weather's closing in. We've got less than 3 minutes before the winds force us down." "Copy. Preparing for extraction." Marco tugged the rope, signaling for lift. Slowly the chair swayed. The root gave way completely, and in that exact second, the entire weight shifted onto the helicopter's cables. By a thread, a single moment, and it would have been over. Thor didn't let go, not even as they rose. His paws clutched. Isabella, as if to say, "I protected you down there, and I'll protect you up here too." At the top of the cliff, a crowd had gathered. Police, firefighters, reporters, farm workers, all watching, some praying, others holding back tears. And then the helicopter's lights broke past the edge. First Marco's head, then his body, holding Isabella with one arm and Thor secured in his harness with the other. Applause exploded, cheers, tears, the sound of hope overcoming the impossible. As soon as the helicopter touched down, paramedics rushed in. Isabella was quickly pulled out, wrapped in thermal blankets. Her arms trembled, her mouth could barely form words, but she found the strength to say, gripping a rescuer's uniform, "Thor, take care of him. Don't let he saved me." Thor, wobbling on weak legs, refused to lie down. He stood by the girl's stretcher, eyes fixed on her, alert, eyes more human than anyone else's there. The local TV reporter, who had rushed to the scene, didn't even know what to say. He simply pointed the camera and let the images speak for themselves. This wasn't just a rescue, it was living proof that loyalty, love, and courage are greater than any tragedy, any cruelty, or any soulless human being. And meanwhile, at the mansion, Leonardo watched on TV something he never thought he'd witness. His daughter was alive. And worse, the dog saw everything. And now, the whole world was going to know. What he didn't realize was that the real hell in his life was only just beginning. The news exploded like a bomb in the small town. Footage of the rescue spread through WhatsApp groups, local news stations, and within less than an hour, it was on national television. The headline blazed across the screens of thousands of Brazilians. Sharp, clear, and cutting like a knife. Child rescued from cliff with help of her hero dog. Police investigate possible attempted homicide. At the hospital, while Isabella received her first treatments, Thor refused to leave her side. The paramedics tried moving him to another room, but the Doberman, even exhausted, let out a low growl, making it crystal clear, "If she stays, I stay." The doctor, a middle-aged man with graying hair and thin-rimmed glasses, watched the scene, shaking his head, visibly moved. "Let him stay," he ordered. "I've never seen a love like this in all my years." Outside, Pedro, still soaked from the storm, gave his statement to the police. His hands trembled, but his voice was steady, fueled by both pain and outrage. "I saw the marks on the ground. No one's going to convince me otherwise. That wheelchair was pushed, she didn't fall. Someone pushed her." The police chief, a serious man with the look of someone who's seen the worst humanity has to offer, wrote down every word. "And who was with her at that moment?" he asked, though the answer was already painfully clear. Pedro drew a deep breath, closed his eyes, and then spoke the words the world needed to hear. Her father, Leonardo Bastos, the heir to the estate. The chief paused for a second, pursed his lips, looked at one of the officers and ordered, "Search warrant. Now, send a unit to Bastos Farm. That man has a lot of explaining to do." Meanwhile, at the mansion, Leonardo paced back and forth, nervous, pale, clutching his phone, calling lawyers, powerful friends, anyone who could pull him out of the nightmare that just hours ago seemed impossible. "This can't be happening. It can't. That girl, that damn dog," he muttered, pressing his hands to his head, and then bam, bam, bam. 3 heavy knocks at the door. "Police, open up!" The sound made Leonardo's blood run cold. For a second, he thought about running, looked toward the back door. Then the staircase, but deep down he knew it was too late. "It's over," he whispered, sinking into the couch, burying his face in his hands, trying to hold onto a composure that no longer existed. The door burst open. Officers stormed. The living room, armed and determined. "Leonardo Bastos, you are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." Leonardo opened his mouth, tried to speak, tried to argue, but nothing came out, only a knot in his throat. For the first time, the man who had always believed himself above everyone and everything felt fear. Back at the hospital, Isabella lay in bed watching the IV drip slowly. Her little eyes no longer held the terror they had before. Now there was something new in them, something called hope. She held Thor's fur tightly in one hand. The dog lay with his head resting on the edge of the bed, not leaving her side for a single second. The doctor walked in, checked her charts, smiled and said, "You are a warrior, young lady. And this guy right here," he glanced at Thor, "he's more than a dog, he's a guardian angel." In the waiting room, Pedro, eyes red with emotion, gripped Maria's hands tightly. They weren't just employees. They had always been, and always would be, that little girl's real family. And now, the whole world would know it too. The TV in the corner broadcasted the breaking news. Breaking: Heir Leonardo Bastos arrested for attempted homicide of his own daughter. Court to decide on temporary custody within hours. The police chief's phone rang. He picked up, listened carefully, then said, "Temporary custody? No! There's nothing temporary about this." Looking at Pedro and Maria, he added, "Where there's love, there's family." And in that moment, a decision began to take shape. A decision that would change Isabella's life forever. The sun had barely risen, but the small town was already wide awake. In front of the courthouse, cameras, reporters, onlookers and residents crowded together, anxiously awaiting what would undoubtedly be the most shocking trial in the town's history. Flashes popped non-stop, microphones thrust forward, voices overlapped. Is it true it was her own father? And the dog, is it true he held her on the cliff? What kind of monster does this to their own child? Inside the building, the silence was almost absolute. Everyone waited for the judge's entrance. In the courtroom, Leonardo Bastos sat handcuffed, head bowed, no longer the arrogant heir who once strutted proudly through town. Now he was merely the pathetic image of a man soulless, consumed by his own venom. Beside him, the court-appointed public defender sighed, shuffling papers, though deep down she knew there's no defense for this. In the front row, sitting hand in hand, were Pedro and Maria, their eyes fixed on the entrance. And between them, in a new, specially adapted wheelchair, was Isabella. By the window, watching everything outside, was Thor, the Doberman, calm but alert. A dog? No, an angel, observing every move, as if he understood he was also part of that courtroom. The bailiff struck the gavel. All rise. The judge entered. A man with white hair, a firm expression, but eyes brimming with humanity. He scanned the packed room, took a deep breath, and then declared, his voice steady, "We are gathered here today to judge not just a crime, but a tragedy that exceeds the bounds of what we understand as humanity." The prosecutor stood, a sharp-eyed, eloquent man, prepared for this moment. He pointed directly at Leonardo, and turning to the judge in the room, said, "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, today we are not simply judging an act of violence. We are judging the gravest violation of the natural order of life, when the one meant to protect chooses to destroy." For hours, the prosecutor laid out the evidence. Photos of the wheelchair tracks at the cliff's edge. The forensic report confirming this was no accident. The wheelchair was pushed. Witness statements. The veterinary report detailing Thor's injuries, confirming the extreme effort the dog endured. And finally, Isabella's testimony. The judge looked at her with kindness, knelt slightly to meet her eye level, and asked with all the gentleness in the world, "Isabella, can you tell me what happened that day?" The entire room held its breath. Isabella drew in a deep breath, squeezed Maria's hand with one hand and Thor's ear with the other. And then, in a soft, fragile but astonishingly steady voice, she replied, My dad took me to see the cliff. He said it was just a walk, but when we got there, he pushed me." She paused, lips trembling but held firm. "I screamed, I cried. I thought I was going to die, but Thor didn't let me. He stayed the whole time. And if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here." The tears fell, but she didn't lower her head. He saved me." The silence that followed seemed to freeze time itself. Some wept, others just stared, not knowing how to react. But no one could look at Leonardo without feeling disgust. The prosecutor closed with, "Your Honor, if a dog was capable of understanding the value of life, love, loyalty, and protection. How could a man not understand? He turned toward the judge, clutching his papers. The prosecution is not only asking for justice, but for the maximum penalty allowed by law, and for this child to never again have to look over her shoulder in fear. The judge paused for a long moment. He sighed, looked over his documents, then at Leonardo, and finally at Isabella, Pedro, Maria, and Thor. And then, with a solemn voice, declared, "Leonardo Bastos, this court finds you guilty of attempted homicide, child endangerment, abandonment of a dependent, and document fraud. You are hereby sentenced to the maximum penalty allowed by law, in addition to the full loss of custody, assets, and all civil rights related to the inheritance and paternity of this child." A wave of gasps swept through the room. Some applauded, others cried, and then the judge added, turning to Pedro and Maria, "Furthermore, this court declares that the full legal and permanent guardianship of Isabella Bastos is hereby granted, by merit, by love, and by dignity, to Pedro and Maria." He smiled gently, "because families is who loves you and who cares for you." The courtroom erupted in applause. Isabella sobbed, hugging Maria and Pedro. Thor barked, howled, as if he understood, as if he was celebrating. And maybe, just maybe, he understood far more than any human there. The judge then looked back at the girl and said, "And as for you, Thor," he paused, a smile curling at the corners of his mouth. "This court hereby officially recognizes you as the lifelong guardian of Miss Isabella." He picked up a small plaque from his bench and read aloud, "Honorary title, Emotional Support Animal and Community Hero." And in that moment, in that exact moment, a new chapter began. The next day dawned differently. The sky seemed bluer, the breeze lighter, and even the birds sang louder. The small town, which had spent days gripped by tension, fear, and outrage, now breathed relief, hope, and a kind of love that seemed to have spread to every corner. At the old caretaker's house, now officially Isabella's new home, everything was alive with movement. The garage had been transformed into an adapted bedroom, full of colors, toys, books, and wide windows, from which she could see the entire garden. And of course, the special little doghouse built right beside the window. Inside it, lying comfortably on a fluffy rug, with a brand new collar and a gold tag engraved with Thor, guardian of Isabella, was him. The four-legged hero. Early. The morning, Pedro was already fixing the new fence in the yard, while Maria finished stringing small lights around the garden. Everything had been designed not just to be a house, but a home. Isabella, now in a custom wheelchair painted with little paw prints to match Thor's, rolled around the yard, laughing, feeling the wind on her face, while the Doberman ran alongside. Her, alert, protective, and as happy as she was. "Run, Thor, run!" she shouted, and he bolted, made a loop, came back barking and wagging his tail as if to say, "It's all joy now, my girl." The community had also come together. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers who followed the story started showing up with gifts, toys, food, and even building supplies. "You're not alone anymore," one said, handing over a toolbox. "This is proof that love builds homes," said another, donating new furniture, and it didn't stop there. Deeply moved by everything he had witnessed, the judge called for an extraordinary meeting at the courthouse. There, with local authorities and the entire community present, he made an announcement that brought tears even to the toughest faces. Starting today, the former Bastos estate will officially be transformed into a center for therapy and healing, a place where children with disabilities and animals can heal together, grow stronger together, and prove that love, loyalty, and courage are the greatest forces in this world. The space was given a name that carried not just a story, but an eternal message. Thor Institute, where love has four paws. The old pasture became a therapy riding track. The renovated barn was turned into a rehabilitation center offering physical therapy, psychological care, social services, and of course a special wing for the animals that would be part of the therapy. And everyone knew exactly who the symbol of that place would be. The Doberman, who once held a child's life between his teeth, defying death, gravity, and fate itself. Meanwhile, back in the garden, Maria braided Isabella's brown hair, smiling as she said, "See, my girl, your story isn't one of pain. It's one of victory." Isabella looked at her, smiling back, and replied with a maturity far beyond her years, "You know, Mom, I used to think family was who you're born from, but now I know. Family is who never lets go of you. Just like Thor, just like you." From a distance, Pedro wiped away a discreet tear, slapped his knee, and added, "And around here, nobody lets go of anybody. Not ever again." Thor barked as if confirming, then lay down, half closing his eyes, resting, but still alert. As if he knew his mission never really ends. And that afternoon, as the sunset painted the sky orange and gold, Isabella, Maria, Pedro, and Thor sat together in the garden. And for the first time in a very long time, they took a deep breath. No fear, no pain, only the certainty that love won. Months had passed since the day that changed everything. The town was no longer the same, not because of the scandal, not because of the trial, but because of the transformation that love had left as its legacy. The Thor Institute, where love has four paws, had become a symbol not just for that town, but for the entire region. Children from other states arrived with their families, seeking not only therapy, but something that can't be bought and can't be taught in any book: hope. And who was the first to greet every child at the Institute's entrance? Him, Thor himself, the Doberman, with a steady gaze, elegant posture, and a heart bigger than any human who had once tried to cause harm. His name was now engraved on plaques, on walls, on medals, but most importantly, etched in every heart. Isabella, now stronger, more confident, led her own activity group. Yes, she was still a student, but even more, she was an inspiration. She told every child who arrived, "You're not just here to learn how to move. You're here to learn to never doubt who you are and how strong you are." And by her side, always, always, was Thor, sitting, lying down, running alongside her wheelchair, barking when needed, licking away tears, spreading love in the only way he knew, purely, fully, endlessly. Old Pedro, now lovingly called by everyone Grandpa Pedro, the grandfather of hope, tended to the garden, the horses, the dogs, the crops, and the very soul of that place. Maria, with a smile that seemed made of sunlight, coordinated the activities, the meals, the classes, and of course, the beating heart of the home. And every time a new child asked, "Aunt Maria, how did all this begin?" she'd sit down, pull up a stool, rest her hand on the child's shoulder and answer, "Sit tight, because I'm going to tell you the story of a dog, a cliff, a little girl, and a love so strong, not even the cruelty of this world could break it." And so the story continued, passed from mouth to mouth, from generation to generation, not as a tragedy, but as living proof that when everything seems lost, there's always a hand or a paw that holds you tight and doesn't let go. And what happened to Leonardo Bastos? Behind bars, condemned, forgotten, and more importantly, drew invisible, because in the end, evil never wins. It makes noise for a while, but the ones who truly build what lasts are those who love. In the garden, as the afternoon faded and the sunset painted the sky, Isabella looked at Thor, stroked his head and whispered, "You know right, Thor. Without you, I wouldn't be here." The dog perked up his ears, pressed his snout into her hand, and let out that deep, content sigh only those who truly love can understand. Pedro, listening from a distance, smiled and said to Maria, "Some folks call this a miracle. I call it pure love, in its most beautiful form." And so, as the garden lights flickered on, as children's laughter filled the air, as Thor ran, jumped, and stood guard, that story became eternal, not on the front pages of newspapers, not on TV screens, but in the hearts of every single person who would one day hear it and understand that love always wins, always.